Very much, Petros, and thanks to the Youth Council and the European Movement International for hosting this work, and all of you for participating today. We're going to be discussing the survey results, survey in Portugal, around 900 plus samples, so it's a good national sample. Um, and I just want to warn you, this is a strategic analysis. So much of polling reports that are done are just data, 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 and you can't really use it. I'm going to look at the data, but through different lenses to help you use it. And at the end, if you hang in for it's a long presentation, but if you hang in for the end, you'll see exactly how you can apply it in terms of targeting your message online and also framing your message to reach persuasive and base audiences. Now, one last caveat, please do not take notes. There's way too much data for you to take notes. Just listen, think. You will all be able to get this entire presentation and download it and look at it later. But there is a lot of data, so don't take notes. It will just be too difficult for you. So first, how does a poll start? How do we start the poll? Well, the poll is very similar at the beginning to polls that are done and you've seen before. So obviously demographics a very important part of it. But then we really go a different place. And that's because we're trying to look at this poll and use this data strategically. We look at something called worldviews, a hostile sexism, populism, authoritarianism, where people fall on the ideological spectrum. And this funny thing called EU segmentation that we'll spend a lot of time talking about today. So we look, these are considered to be worldviews or developed behaviors. And we look at those in the poll and go into detail in the polls in the poll. And that's what makes it different. This different from polls you might see in the newspaper. They don't touch these things. We also look at a series of sort of fundamental values, pride in country, social cohesion, traditions, how people feel about democracy, their tolerance towards other people, and demand for order. A whole nother set of questions that you never really see asked in a poll. And the question is, the importance here is we just don't ask these questions. We use them to understand who people are, how they think, what their attitudes are, and what their behaviors are. And then finally, we come to the typical questions you see in the poll, all the issue questions. Where do people stand on women's rights, institutions, threats, climate change, social justice? And those are important questions to have, but they're really useful if you filter the answers through the worldviews like hostile sexism or authoritarianism and critical values that people hold, their thoughts about democracy, and their demographics. And why is this important? Because when we do that, we can really target and frame messages for individual audiences, which is the goal here. And then finally, we do this one weird thing. And you say, what is this? Reverse engineering questions. Many of your colleagues gave us questions that they thought would be descriptive of how people behaved in Portugal. And these questions are atypical, not typical at all for a poll. And they're questions that we can use to tie up a lot of our conclusions to online behaviors, which means we can go from a poll data point to a poll insight to communications online. And we'll find that you will at the end, the reverse engineering questions give us a lot of different ways into reaching specific groups of target audiences in Portugal. So at the end of this last 20 slides, believe it or not, I'm going to apply this all, everything you're about to see, to segmentation and targeting that you can use today after this is over, and framing and messaging that you can use today to communicate positively about really almost any set of issues, but certainly about the EU and the EU's and Portugal's partnership. So let's start, because I like to ask people questions, with 4 questions of all of you. And these are yes or no questions. So in your own mind, answer yes or no. First question. is a democratic political system in my country is a very good or fairly good way of governing my country? So yes or no, democratic political system, a very good or fairly good way of governing my country? That's the first question, yes or no. Question number two, democracy is preferable to any other kind of government, yes or no? All right, question number three, and keep track, how many yeses do you have? Why don't you keep track of yeses? This question is asked backwards, so watch what we're doing. Yes or no? It's reverse. Army rule is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. Yes or no? So if you like army rule, you say, no, I think army rule is a really good way of governing my country. If you don't like army rule, you say, yes, it's a bad way or very bad way of governing my country. So how many yeses do you have now? And then the fourth one, and watch this question, a strong leader who does not have to bother with parliament or elections is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. So a strong leader who doesn't bother with parliament or elections is a bad or very bad way of governing my country. Yes or no? Now tally them up. How many yeses did you have? If you said yes to all four questions, you are what we consider a consistent supporter of democracy. And this is a measure that's used really around the world. And it first started in the United States, but it takes questions from the World Values Survey and other surveys that have been asked for decades and puts them into a scale of consistency of support for democracy. And I would bet most of the people on this call answered all four questions yes, which means probably 70, 75, 80% of us, your typical audience I speak to, are consistent supporters of democracy. So let's take it back to Portugal. What percentage of citizens in Portugal always support democracy? What percent of citizens answered yes to all four of those questions in our poll? Get a number in your mind. I think most of you are probably saying 50, 60, maybe 70%. Well, the answer is not that. The answer is 29%, less than a third, just under a third, of people in Portugal, Portuguese, always support democracy. Now, you might say, oh, that's kind of surprising, but it is not atypical. The United States, last time this was done, was 49% of citizens in the United States always support democracy. Across Europe, from the 2019 survey, here are 13 European countries. You can see Denmark was the highest, 68%. Bulgaria was the lowest, 15%. Portugal really fits in the cohort of groups that go from Estonia to France. There's really very little statistical difference between a 29 and a 34 or 37 here. So Portugal is in one of the, isn't in the high cohort, it's sort of in the middle cohort, but it's still something to be aware of. And why should you be aware of it? When you communicate, you probably assume that most people, yeah, let's go, democracy, love it. The fact is that some people, many people have problems with certain parts of democracy, and they aren't consistent supporters of democracy. Now let's look at this on a graph. And I want you to take a second to stay with this graph because you're going to see a lot of graphs like this from now on. This is support of democracy. On the vertical, we have percent of population. So the vertical axis. So you can see there's your 29%. You can see 10, 20, 30, 40. Across the bottom of this scale are bars. The blue bars in every scale you see from now on, any bar that's blue is the position supports democracy or civil society. Yellow is where it's starting to turn towards supporting a liberal democracy. I'll use Orban's language here. And orange to red are people who really oppose democracy, civil society, progressivism. They are more authoritarian, more autocratic, more for the strong leader. And as you can see, every graph will be displayed this way: blue bars, yellow, orange, quick ways for you to understand what's going on. Okay. So here we have 29% totally consistent support in Portugal for democracy. See that yellow bar? That's people who voted once against democracy or made one of those no choices. What question did they drop out on? Well, here's the question. Having a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament and elections is a good way or very good way of governing Portugal. So basically, they want a strong leader to solve problems, or they're open to it. I don't know if they want it, they are open to it. You'll see later that they're open to it, but they might not really like it that much. And the question is, who are those people? People don't walk around. When you go outside and walk down to the cafe today or to get a coffee or something, you don't see people with signs saying, I'm a totally consistent supporter of democracy. I'm 1 for 4. So how can we define these people and everyone who's in the orange and red? Can we? And the point is that the results are actually we can define them through worldviews and demographics and other attitudes. So let's look at these people. The people who are totally consistent supporters of democracy are not authoritarians as measured in the poll. These are all measured in the poll. Not hostile sexists. They're on the left, as you would expect. They're older, they're male, and they're higher educated. Those who are inconsistent supporters are more likely to be authoritarian, hostile sexist, ideologically on the right, younger, female, and less educated. Now you might say hostile sexist and female, they don't go together. This is from regression analysis. So it looks at each item individually against the dependent variable. And where the women really fall out is on, as you'd expect, having a strong leader. Hostile sexes fall out across all of the 4 questions. One thing that is consistent across all of this is that younger people in Portugal, in Germany, in France, the Netherlands, United States, you name it, where we poll it, younger people are less supportive of democracy. And my belief, and not my belief, my analysis of this based on lots of research and lots of data is that younger people are frustrated with democracy. It takes too long to get things done. They want things done now, like climate change. Let's just solve it. And they're not finding that, so they're more likely to say, let's just have a strong leader, my leader, who will go and get things done. Someone who will get things done. So we can take all these questions and divide them up by these different variables, by these different worldviews, if it's authoritarianism, by demographics, if it's older or higher educated. And there's one other way we can divide them up, and that's by this thing, look down on the lower right-hand corner, EU Seg 4. That would be European Union Segment 4. And you're going to say, I've never heard of that before, and that's okay, no one has. But now you're going to learn a lot about this because we find out that the European segments, European segmentation, is a very good way of sorting the citizens of Portugal, the Portuguese. It's an excellent way of sorting them attitudinally. And when we add in authoritarianism on top of it and some of these other variables, it's an excellent way of sorting them. And if we can sort them into segments, we can communicate with them by segment 2. And so there are 4 segments that come out of just 3 questions asked about the European Union. The 4 segments are, I'm enthusiastic. That's a blue bar. Remember, blue is good and dark blue is even better. 44% of Portugal fits into EU segment 1 enthusiasts. 34% are moderates, 14% are ambivalents, 8% are skeptics. The yellows and the red, that's the opposition. Red is hard opposition. You will never convince them, at least in my lifetime. The 14 are not worth it. They represent 22% of Portugal. Very, very difficult. If you got 1 out of every 10 of them, you'd be lucky. But you can see there's a good base, really strong base of enthusiasts and a bunch of moderates. And we can map on top of this variables. We can map on top of it worldview. We can map on top of demographics and fundamental values. So we find that enthusiasts of the EU are consistent supporters of democracy, everyone who answered yes 4 times. They're not populist. And on the inverse, opponents are inconsistent when it comes to democracy. They're populist. And interestingly enough, they never attend church. So here we've got a demographic coming in, church attendance too. What else can we know about them? Well, we can really think about these audiences as base, the base support for EU integration and the EU project. Persuadable, that would be the 34%. The next level, persuadable, the 14%, though again, I think if you get 1 out of 10 of them, you're lucky. And then the hard opposition. But you could see Portugal is one of the most strongly supportive of EU, as you already know. And here's the example, here's the data that proves it. So when we look at these worldviews, when we look at these segmentation, demographics, we find that there's a divide in Portuguese public opinion. And that divide shapes political choices, attitudes, and identity. And if you can define that divide, you can use it to structure communications. So what are components of that divide? Well, first, the worldviews we've talked about. Not on every issue, but on many. Authoritarianism, hostile sexism, ideology, populism. And these aren't just terms, they are terms that are defined in the poll, and we ask people where they stand on them. We don't say, are you authoritarian or not? We ask a bunch of child-rearing questions to figure out authoritarianism. So first, it's worldviews. Second, it is demographics, your age, your education, your gender, and church attendance actually matters on a few issues. And then finally, what I consider learned behaviors. Support for democracy, that's what we started with. Support for the EU. When you're born, you don't say, I'm a supporter of democracy when you're 6 months old, or I support the EU when you're 6 months old. You learn these behaviors. But these 10 worldviews, demographics, and learned behaviors can be applied to almost any issue in Portugal and tell us where people will come out on that issue. And what does that mean? Here's what it means. Let's look at political choices. This is political choice from 2021 presidential election. Were you for the Social Democratic Party or the Socialist Party, or did you support enough, Jacob? And just so you know, here's the actual vote in the presidential election and the reported vote in the polls. So you can see the poll was very close. Poll was done well after the presidential election, but it's how people told us they voted. So very, very close. All right, so political choices, we can sort these political choices and know what these political choices are going to be by basically knowing these different things. If you're a consistent supporter of democracy, ideologically on the left, and you're a regular churchgoer, you're more likely to support PSD or PS. Ideologically on the right, you're going to support Chega. That seems makes sense, and it actually tests out statistically. When you see this information in the peach color, these are regression analysis data points. What else can we know about this? EU segments. 92% of the people in EU segment 1, those were the enthusiasts, supported PSD or PS. 51, half of the people in EU segment 4 supported enough. So we find that the EU segmentation also structures political choice. There's a real divide in this country, in your country, by EU segments. And that divide cuts through issue after issue. And attitudes. Let's look at attitudes. Satisfaction with democracy. Here's your basic very satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. You can see 48% of the people in Portugal, Portuguese, are satisfied with democracy. A majority, 57%, are dissatisfied. Well, that's a little concerning, right? But let's look at it. And actually, when you see this on the outside, the dissatisfied is 3 times greater, 3.5 times greater than very satisfied. That's a concern. That means people are more dissatisfied. But we can also layer on top of this all sorts of demographics and worldviews. And you can see consistent supporters of democracy, not populist ideologically on the left, are more likely to be satisfied. The inverse of that, and never go to church, are somewhat dissatisfied. Those are also the people who are EU segment 4 people, more likely to be EU segment 4 people. And you can see when we add in the segmentation, the same thing. Satisfied, EU segment 1, 65% of them are satisfied about democracy. 51% of EU segment 2 is very dissatisfied when it comes to democracy. So you can see that these worldviews, demographics, specific demographics, and EU segmentation is a way to understand Portuguese public opinion, a very powerful way. What other attitudes? Well, here's a good one. The question here is political extremism is a threat to Portugal's democracy and democratic institutions. Strongly agree with this, strongly disagree, blue to red. And you can see most people, we're at like 75% say, yeah, extremism is a threat to Portugal's democracy and democratic institutions. They perceive the threat, and 50% say it's really bad. 61% of EU segment 1 strongly agree with this statement. Only 36% of EU segment 4 agree with this. All right, next question. We must defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. You can see the numbers went up on the strongly agree. You're almost at 90% saying, yeah, in terms of agree. We got to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. The threat question was at 50%. You can see defending goes up another 14 points. That's a big, big number. All right. Do we see differences in a Portuguese population on this question? Yes, we do. 73% of EU segment 1 agrees and says we got to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. But if we layer in all these other variables, here's what we find. If you're inconsistent supporter of democracy, if you're a hostile sexist, if you're on the right ideologically, if you're younger, not all young people, but some young people, more than you would expect statistically, if you vote for enough, and if you're not a populist, key, you say, hey, I disagree. We don't need to defend democracy from authoritarians and extremists. You are really part of the core of a liberalism here. So if you're EU segment 4, and you're also all these other things circled in red, this is the liberal core in Portugal. These are the people, if you are communicating, you don't need to talk to. Not all young people. You got to break out the young people, right? There's some young people you're not going to get to. There are a lot who need education. There are a lot who support you too. It's probably a third. But that a third who said we don't need to defend democracy, you really don't need to talk to them right now. You need to get the people in the middle, the young people in the middle, and you need to bolster your base too. So that is a liberalism's core in Portugal. The good news is it's a lot smaller than in other countries. What other countries? Well, where I'm sitting right now, the United States of America, the liberalism core is like twice that. So I want to move to Portugal if we could. That would be wonderful if you let me in. Okay, other attitudes. Institutional trust. And I'm going to go quickly through these because I want to get to Europe. Trust in national government. Blue bar is high trust in national government. Blue bar is also high trust in the European Union. The red bar is not trust. And you can see people are more trustful of the European Union than they are your national government. But it's still all under 50%. All right. But then look at this. In terms of EU segments, here's trust. And just 52% of EU segment 1, much higher than the average, trust the national government, only 17% of EU segment 4. So again, we see that same divide. I'm going to hammer on that divide and how useful these EU segments are. And in trust in the European, 70% of EU segment 1 say, hey, I have high trust in the European Union. Only 14% of EU segment 4, which really goes back to my point here that these people are really hard to reach. They are your opposition base, okay? Let's keep moving on. Pride in country. I would think there'd be great pride in Portugal. I have visited. I love it. And you can see in this graph, the dark blue is very proud, quite proud of the country. It's almost 85% pride in the country, which is really spectacular. That's a great, great number. There's some who are not very proud and not proud at all. Who are those people? You are going to be surprised. Uh, if we look at EU segments 1, 2, and 3, you can see 9% of EU segment 1 not proud, 13% of EU segment 2, 22% of EU segment 3. So the first two are below average, the next one's above. Look at EU segment 4, 50% of EU segment 4, those are the skeptics, are not proud or not proud at all of Portugal. So pride is ours. Our people, our base, our persuadables have great pride in Portugal, our country. It is the people who are in the ambivalence and skeptics for sure, EU segment 4, who do not have pride in the country. That's a really important attitudinal thing to know, because you can talk about pride in the country, and you should talk about pride in country. Identity is another thing. First, you can be proud of your country, then what's your identity? And here, the question is simply, how do you think of yourself? Portuguese only, Portuguese and European, that's the next bar over, European and Portuguese, or European only, or I don't know. And you can see about a third of the population identifies as Portuguese only, but over 50% identify as Portuguese and European. And that's key to know. Why? Because when we look at segments and we apply segments on it, EU segment 1, over 60% say they're Portuguese and European, not just Portuguese. And only 28% say they're Portuguese only. And if we look at EU segment 4, we see 43% Portuguese only, 32% Portuguese and European. So segment 4, they don't have great pride in country, but they define themselves, they're more likely to find themselves, and put more likely probabilistically every time I say something, because this is all about probability, right? Segment 4 is more likely to say they're Portuguese only, they are nationalists, strong nationalists. They're a small number of people overall in Portugal, but they're strong nationalists. And we've looked at attitudes that divide. Now let's look at attitudes that people share. Generally share, there's some places where they drop out here. And when I mean share, usually they're very high numbers, but also we don't see statistical differences in different regression analyses. So risk averse. Portuguese say no to radical change. Here are the two questions. It's too risky to support political parties with radical ideas for change. 73% of your country people agree with that. Only 27% say, yeah, let's elect a radical political party with radical ideas. Okay. Next question. Yes, about if you're open to changing traditions. 75% of Portugal is open to changing traditions to make Portugal better off. Only 25% say we got to stick to the traditions we have. So what you have is people don't want radical change, but they're willing to change traditions gradually if it will make Portugal better off. And that's a very shared attitude across almost all worldviews and demographics, except for authoritarians and people who voted Chega. Enough. They want Portugal to stick to traditions. That is what they care about. Okay, other shared attitudes. And these are ones I will warn you to be worried about, because they are worrisome as we go down. And the bottom is still blue, red still means the same, but notice that the metrics have changed. Blue is now strong disagree, red is strong agree, because this is coded for a pro-democracy, pro-liberal to anti-democracy, anti-liberal. So strong disagree with this question. Sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own country. As people care about civil society, we don't want people feeling like a stranger in my country or in Portugal. So I would disagree with that question. But as you can see here, more people agree with the question, either somewhat or strongly, than disagree. So people are feeling somewhat alienated in Portugal. Why? Well, and if you look at segments just quickly, 59% of EU segment 4 agree that they feel like a stranger in their country. 37%, more than a third of EU segment 1 agree. That's a little concerning number to me. Let's dig down a little bit more. People like me are being left behind. Same scale, and you can see that somewhat agree and strongly agree. See those arrows going up in neither? Those numbers have gone up from stranger, a little bit different scale, to being left behind. The numbers have gone up. And now 74% of EU segment 4, 3 out of every 4 people in segment 4 feel like they're left behind. And EU segment 1, those are our EU enthusiasts, right? Who like democracy, care about civil society, are proud of their country. They feel like they're being left behind too. Almost half of them feel like they're being left behind. Okay, so what is the key to this being left behind? I think you already know it, but we'll go through this data. People like me don't benefit enough from Portugal's economic success. There's a perception of difference in the distribution of economic rewards. And you can see the strongly agree number really has grown to almost, it's more than 3 out of every 10 people say they strongly agree that people aren't benefiting. So they feel like a stranger in their country. They feel like they're being left behind, and they're being left behind economically. And let's look at the EU segments on that. A majority of all EU segments, from 1, 55%, to 4, 78%, feel they don't benefit enough from Portugal's economic success. That's a danger sign. That's why I put a little exclamation point there. We also put the danger sign. Woo, danger, danger. That's very dangerous. That's dangerous. And it goes to this question: economic inequality is growing in Portugal. Look at the strongly agree now. So stranger, being left behind, it's because there's economic inequality in Portugal, and people are concerned about it, and they don't like it, and they see it as a real problem. And this is the problem that you must address to keep Portugal on a democratic, democracy-loving, civil society supporting country. And let's look at the EU segments here. This is real. I see put storm warning up. This is real danger. The percentages who agree that economic inequality is growing in Portugal are all above 80% or above. That is very dangerous. And the first thing you would expect takes us back to the top of my presentation. The first thing that you would expect is, support for a strong leader to support this. And we noticed in the polling that we shared that over 30% of people said, a strong leader who wouldn't pay any attention to Parliament and bother with elections would be a good thing. I'd be okay with that. So what we should see in the next question, or we could see, is support for a strong leader to fix this growing economic inequality, and we don't. We don't, and that's very important. The question here is, to bring Portugal back to order, we need a strong leader who's willing to break the rules. And as you can see, just over 50%, that would be the dark blue bar, strong disagree, and the somewhat disagree bar, disagree with that notion. Another 20% are in the middle. And what we've got, the fever is broken. Yes, I feel like a stranger in my country. Yes, I feel people are being left behind. Yes, I think economic inequality is bad, but I'm not really willing yet to opt for a strong leader to fix all these things, or who promises to fix all these things. We know a strong leader won't fix those things, or is unlikely to fix those things, but that is the siren song of authoritarianism. So the fever is broken right now, which means we don't see this strong agree, we see it as a strong disagree. But let's look at it by EU segments. 61% of EU segment 1 strongly disagrees with this. 33% of EU segment 4 strongly agrees. So EU segment 4 is already down the road towards a strong leader. EU segment 1 and EU segment 2 are hanging in there. All right, that's Portugal by itself. Now let's look at views of the European Union. I'm going to go through this quickly, and then I'm going to summarize it all into something you can use today. So is Portugal and the EU on the right track or wrong track? Right track is blue. You can see Portuguese feel that European Union is a little bit more on the right track than Portugal itself, and a lot less on the wrong track. This is good news across the board. I mean, right track for Portugal is just under 50. Obviously, economic inequality, if we ask that, it would be different. That's the big problem that we're facing right now. How does this work in terms of EU segments? We have an inverse here, as you would expect. 77% of EU segment 1 say, yeah, EU's on the right track. Only 7% of EU segment 4 say that, and it's the exact opposite when we talk about wrong track. So EU segment 4, people think European Union's on the wrong track. Okay. And the thing that you need to worry about is EU segment 2 here. That don't know number is big. 31% don't know if the European Union's on the right track or the wrong track. We need to talk to them about the European Union and what the European Union is doing that helps Portugal. We want to move them to a right track number, and that will make them stronger supporters of the EU. These are people who are more likely to be in the moderate EU segment 2 or the ambivalent EU segment 3. All right, so what should the EU work on? What do Portuguese want the EU to work on? Well, number one, EU should address reducing poverty and social inequality. Totally fits with the concerns here about economic inequality. And they want improving the public health system. And then third, climate change. But I got to tell you, climate change is probably perfect for younger voters. But for the society as a whole, poverty and inequality is twice as important to them in terms of EU working on issues than climate change. Doesn't mean it can't change, but right now, that's the way it stands. And why should we remain in the EU? Why should Portugal remain in the EU? Well, freedom to study, live, work, and travel always comes up as number one in every EU country. Number 2 and 3 are very important, however. EU's work on women's rights and equality for all, and also EU's investment in improving the standard of living and improving the economy, which works directly with reducing poverty and inequality. So it's economic issues, it's rights issues in terms of women's rights and equality for all that are the most important issues for the EU to address. Generally, when it comes to climate change, younger Portuguese are going to be very, very interested in that, obviously. Some quick attitudes on the EU. Solidarity. 2 questions, you get to choose one or the other. 84% of Portuguese say we should do everything we can to help other EU countries in need. Only 16% say solidarity is being pushed too far. So they're for solidarity within the EU. Portuguese also aren't nationalists. When EU's leaders disagree, I want decisions based on what is best for the EU as a whole. 75%, 3 out of 4 Portuguese agree with that. Only 25% take the nationalist position. I want my country's position to always prevail when EU leaders disagree. That said, Portuguese feel that EU leaders bicker too much. There's too much bickering in the EU. And you can see that somewhat agree, that orange bar and the red bar, really high. You know, you got almost 60% of Portuguese saying, yeah, I agree. EU leaders bicker too much. And that goes back to decision-making, democracy, compromise taking time. There is impatience with that. There's impatience everywhere with that. This is really strong impatience. So I'm impatient with the EU. I'm kind of liking what they're doing, but I'm impatient with it. But is it a threat to Portugal's sovereignty? And you'll see here, no, it's not a threat. So the EU is not seen as a threat to Portugal's sovereignty, except by EU segment 4, and only 4 out of 10 of them see EU as a threat to Portugal's sovereignty. So that whole argument is a pretty minor argument. It only works with the real opposition, the real skeptics, what we would call in our parlance the wingnuts. And I don't think it has a chance to grow. Now let's look finally just on some topical issues dealing with COVID. How did the EU deal with COVID? Uh, Good marks, somewhat good to very good dominates here, almost 80%. I'll say somewhat or very good. Only a few say bad or somewhat bad. As you would see, there's big difference. EU segment 1, 90% say good. EU segment 4, 71% say bad, which goes to why I don't think you can get EU segment 4 people back. And I think it's really hard to get EU segment 3. Concentrate on EU segment 2, especially younger voters, younger people there. Dealing with COVID, has it made it better or worse? So the EU has helped reduce the effects of COVID in Portugal, or EU has made the effects of COVID worse in Portugal. 82% say they've helped reduce the effects of COVID in Portugal. You've also done a phenomenal job with vaccination. 18% has made it worse. And again, you see the breakdown between EU segment 1 and EU segment 4, which is why I'm saying EU segment 4. They say that EU has made the effects of COVID worse in Portugal. Almost 1 out of every 10 of them have said that. And then finally, COVID shows we need a strong EU. So what EU did on COVID with Portugal shows that a strong EU benefits all members. Strong agree over 80% on this, and agree over 80%. Strong agree 59% with EU segment 1. Another thing to look at, and then we'll get to tying it up, the EU Recovery Fund, support for it. As you can see, we got strong support to strong oppose. The blues are the support. The support is very, very high for the EU Recovery Fund. And you should expect EU segment 1 has strong support, but almost 50% of EU segment 3 support the EU European Recovery Fund too. So we were talking about how do we get to EU segment 2 people? You talk about the European Recovery Fund. How do you get to EU segment 3 people? Even if you're going after them, again, I think that they're secondary persuadable target. 50% of them say that the European Recovery Fund is a good thing, and they support it. Will the Recovery Fund help Portugal recover faster? Most people strongly agree or somewhat agree that it will. Who doesn't? Well, EU segment 4, 48% disagree that it'll help Portugal recover faster. And then look at these. Again, a reason why to talk about the European Recovery Fund. Over 86% of EU segment 3 somewhat agree or strongly agree that the recovery fund is going to help Portugal recover faster. That's on the economy. That economy is the key thing, the key issue we need to address. So it's a great place to go. All right, so now in the last 10 minutes, I want to apply this. I know that was a lot of data, throwing a lot at you. Hope you see that the EU segments are good. The problem is, we know how the population distributes in these EU segments, but as we said earlier, people don't walk around with a badge that says, I'm an EU enthusiast or I'm a EU moderate. You can't find those people walking around on the street and identify them. But how can we identify them? Is there a way to identify them? And actually, the worldviews, demographics, and other attitudes we've talked about are great ways to identify and segment, apply these segments to communications. So how do you do that? And this is where the real key of the presentation here. Well, first we know base persuadable 1, persuadable 2, and opposition. But we can apply on top of these top line variables and demographics to start sorting these. And these first gray ones here, they come from consistent support for democracy. So we know that in our base and in the moderates, those people are more likely to be consistent supporters of democracy and not populists. And we know in the demographics from the consistency with support question that, that they never attend church. Our opposition is less likely, much less likely to attend church. All right, well, that's helpful. I can go into Facebook right now or Instagram or Telegram or others, and not Telegram as well, Twitter, and I can start targeting by these. I can target very, very well on Facebook and Instagram by these. But what else? There's a lot else. Next, you'll see, I'm sorry, the first one was, this one is consistent support for democracy. And when you layer in consistent support for democracy, other variables and demographics that we find separating these segments, you find that we can add authoritarianism, hostile sexism, idiot on the left, older and higher education, when we're trying to find our base and persuadables in terms of targeting. So we can apply all these things through targeting platforms online and use it to sort our audience, not perfectly, but really well, into enthusiasts, moderates, and opponents. All right. So how would you find someone who's not a hostile sexist? Well, if I'm on Facebook, I look for someone who supports women's rights. So people who are interested in women's rights, yeah, those are people who are going to be enthusiasts or moderates. Older is easy, higher education is easy. And obviously with the younger, and I know the youth council people are listening in here, the younger people, we have to get down and drill down on how to split them out because they're not all in persuadable and opposition. I'd say probably a third of them are. We're really looking for those who are in the moderates. And there are ways, especially climate change is a way to sort those folks. What else can we layer on top? Political choice. You know, we have the choice in the 2021, reported choice in the 2021 presidential election. Well, we can add these two variables on top. Regular churchgoers are more likely to be enthusiasts or moderates. Enough supporters are more likely to be in the opposition audiences. What else can we add? Defend democracy. Remember that defend democracy question? So now when you see green and blue together, like in not authoritarians, that means that the variable hit twice on two different issues we are looking at. So you can see Chega supporters even more in the opposition, more certain to be, and the sexism also playing out here, and the consistency of support for democracy playing out here too. But something you probably didn't notice is that there was a statistical anomaly in the data, and that's on populism. And here's the deal with populism. We need to throw that out as a way of sorting. Because on some things, populists are opposition audiences. On other things, especially support for democracy quite often, or defending democracy, they're for us. So we just need to throw it out as a way of thinking. It's not useful because it bounces around. I know that's going to be, oh my God, populism's the way we understand this. No, you can understand this divide through authoritarianism, hostile sexism, ideology, consistent support for democracy, and demographics. Issues also sort people quite nicely into base and opposition. And it's not just, do I like the EU or not? These are being applied on top of the EU. Satisfied with democracy, dissatisfied, pro-women's rights, women's rights, same with human rights, concerns about climate change. Climate's not an issue. These issues can be applied on top of it. And also EU issues, the ones we just went through. All of these can be used to sort the population. So how would you use EU? There's several great EU sorts, support for EU sorts on Facebook that you can use. So all of these can be applied to sort, to take these segments and apply them online so you can target enthusiasts and moderates for communications. And then finally, the last one that can be added are the reverse engineering questions. Remember, I talked to you about those and you said, what in heck are those? That's really stupid. I don't know what Matt is talking about. Here are the reverse engineering questions that really sorted people by EU segments. And this is, again, all statistically sound. Legalizing adoption, same-sex couples don't legalize. I would just go to any LGBTQ plus targeting on Facebook and use that. Wearing a mask, don't wear a mask. That's going to be harder to use, but abortion rights. And then you can see some of your political figures sort as you would expect in terms of segmentation. Cristiano Ronaldo, people who like Ronaldo are much more likely in base and persuadable. And the next two are also great ways of sorting segments. All right, so now you can apply all of this online to sort by segments. What do you say to them? What do you say to them? Well, let's just think about this in terms of the EU and in terms of your basic messaging. First, the identity that you want to communicate to people, who you are as a person or as a group, is that you're Portuguese first, European second. It's not all EU, it's Portuguese first, European second. So, you saw the numbers on that, very high. You want to join those two together. Your emotions, hope, not fear. You have great pride in Portugal. Remember, our opponents don't have pride in Portugal. We have great pride in Portugal. And your outlook's future oriented, focused on a better future for all. And that better future focuses in on poverty reduced, social equality, which gets to women's rights, human rights, and the other things, and better public health. That's your outlook. Those are the things you're working for. Reduce inequality, both social and economic inequality. The goal is a better economy, fairness, equality, social, political, and economic. And you must acknowledge and address economic inequality. I mean, that is the elephant, as we would say, in the room, which means that's the big issue you cannot ignore, is economic inequality. It is gigantic, and it can hurt if we don't acknowledge it and address it. So that's the basic framing. What about, and you can see how it fits with the EU's place in the world. People want EU to reduce poverty and social inequality. They want to improve the public health system. They want to work on rights and equality. And they want the EU to invest in standard of living and improve economy. So what can you say today? Say today to people, if we're just talking about the EU, I mean, this you can use for all your communications. And for the Youth Council, I would add in climate change when you're specifically talking to young folks. Here's what you can apply today. There are real benefits for Portugal, the EU. You can talk about those benefits. EU investments that are going to improve the economy. EU investments that are bringing the economy back. EU support. EU solidarity and stands on women's rights, equality, the freedom to travel, study, and work, and a stronger EU is good, and what Portuguese care about. And then recent examples of the benefits of EU, COVID-19 and the EU Recovery Fund. But you have to acknowledge that the EU is a work in progress. We'll go back to EU segment 2. They don't know if the EU is, if they trust the EU or not, 31% of them. You have to say the EU is a work in progress. It's not perfect. Yes, there's a lot of bickering, but it's helping Portugal, and it's good to be in solidarity with the EU, and it's good for the European project all along. So that is how you can use that message today with those target segments.